Okay.
Could you hear that?
I
It says
did.
and then I have to say got it, or I have to leave the meeting.
Oh, okay. Neat.
So, yeah.
Hello, and welcome to Greet the Week. I am Mona Duncan, and this program is just to kind of share some thoughts that have impacted my life, and hopefully they can impact your life also. Today, we're going to be talking about thoughts and how we can use those thoughts to overcome guilt and shame. And I have a PowerPoint here that we will start from the beginning. And please know it's just some thoughts that have been effective for me, and wanting to pass it on that maybe they will be effective for you also. But realizing that things are always changing and we are always changing. So sometimes one idea adapted from yesterday may have a little different tweak to it today. But I have found that life experiences mostly produce one of two things for us as individuals: that we begin to arrive at adulthood with a sense of wholeness and knowing who we are, or that we have an arrival at adulthood of being empty and having this need for others to validate us, and that we need to overcome rather than to be overcome by the incorrect thoughts of life, things that we have thought on our own, maybe things that others have said to us. So here's just some random thoughts about guilt. Just one is that guilt is a default mechanism of the psychic that can be either a friend or a foe. And in that default segment, just like we sometimes have a fever, which is an early indication that something in the body is amiss, well, so too that feeling or that gnawing of guilt or of shame is something that is an alert from deep in our psychic that's trying to show us that something is amiss. And that we have this inner knowing of right from wrong with a compulsion to do the right thing. The only thing is it may not be exactly what we're wanting, or it may not be as much fun as we would anticipate otherwise. So guilt becomes our foe when we know about it, but we run from it. We deny it. We downplay it. Big deal. Everybody's like that. And it can be difficult for us. Guilt becomes our friend when we honestly self-evaluate the error and begin to take some steps for correction, or to make the decision of, oh, I'm not doing that again. And knowing that error leans toward darkness because, I'm ashamed. I don't want to admit. I don't want to. And it leans toward darkness and dis-ease. We're no longer at ease with who we are. We become more. Whereas accountability leads to restoration. But the needs that we have, the 5 basic needs we have, they never go away. They're always there, and they always need to be fulfilled in a way that is need satisfying without harming someone else also. So looking at this true guilt versus a false guilt. True guilt is a fact. It's a reality, whether it's felt or unfelt, that something is amiss, that putting personal interests, personal wants, personal needs above another's, and therefore being irresponsible. And Dr. Glasser, with reality therapy and choice theory, defined being irresponsible as being unhappy, and being unhappy is being irresponsible. And it begins to lead to all kinds of difficulties in our life. So anyway, it's a fact. There has been a misdeed of some kind that maybe we spoke too loudly, maybe we interrupted. I mean, we won't go into what it is, but it's a misdeed. And there is a legitimate need that was met in a self-indulgent way or in an unkind way. And that led to the true guilt. I mean, just like fever in the body saying something is amiss, that guilt is saying something is amiss here. I wronged someone, and that amends are appropriate. And that can lead us to a legitimate shame of realizing that I am genuinely sorry for my misdeed, for my misstep. I do not want to be that kind of person. That's not who I am deep down in my wisdom heart. And so that leads to us needing to correct it, to the admission of our need and an inappropriate way of trying to get that need met. And that then is for clemency, to receive a pardon for my errors. Now, others may or they may not, but if we've made the effort, then that effort in and of itself needs to be enough, needs to be enough. And that leads to restitution. May be needed, it may not be needed. As a matter of fact, just coming to a decision on our own that we have made an error and then apologized for it, and then making a promise to not do it again and keeping the promise to ourselves, which leads to grace. It's the realization that I had been given something what I didn't earn. I misstepped, I was not kind, and I have been, restitution has been made. And that leads to humility. It's accepting my limitations and my human weakness, but it's also accepting the fact that my human weakness has been turned to a human strength. And that leads to freedom. The freedom that, yes, I am a person of infinite worth and value, but you are also a person of infinite worth and value. And that our relationship can be symbiotic again, that we can be friends with each other. Whereas that false guilt, where we somehow come into adulthood or an age again in our life where we still have that emptiness and that need to please others. And that false guilt is that innate feeling, that naggingness that you're not enough. But the thing of it is that we are enough. I like to ask students frequently, or people that I'm talking with frequently, what would you tell your younger self? Well, I would tell my younger self that you are enough. And I hope that you'll tell your younger self that also. You are enough. And so we have a misdeed, or at least in my eyes, I saw it as a misdeed. And I'm inadequate, and I have not measured up to your standards. Or sometimes it's the self-imposed standards of perfection that we have put on ourselves. And that leads to a pseudo-shame, that I cannot let you see me as being needy, because then, well, I won't measure up to your standards. And you've seen who I am, so all the masks are off, and it shows that I really am a mistake, which then leads into anger. First of all, I'm angry at me because I need you. Or maybe I am angry because my misdeed exposed who I am, and you see it. And that can lead to a false guilt, because then if I'm guilty, that puts me back in control, but it's in a very negative control, because I don't need you. That anger, it covers the anger and the inadequacy. And so I'm back to being in charge again. But it begins to weigh on us, and it begins to paying for our wrongdoings. Well, if I just worked hard enough, if I just became perfect, then everything would be all right. And it can lead to being compulsive and to be obsessive about exactness, which leads to remorse. No matter how hard I try, I'm just not good enough. And it leads to the poor little me. False promises, making vows and commitments that, again, we fail to live up to, because that weight is there and it's bowing us down so much that it's ineffective. It's not working, which brings divisions, break in fellowship with seeing self and who you are, plus also those others that we have a very desperate need to be a part of. Leads to legalism, that emptiness, that even being empty and not being able to measure up, it's still that renewed thirst to be okay, to matter, to be a part of, to be needed, which can lead to a false pride. Well, that's just the way I am, by crackies. I can't help it. And then it must be in my genes. I must be like someone else. I just can't help it. And I'm okay, but unfortunately, you are not okay. And that leads to bondage and misery. It's a lack of sorrow over our wrongs, and then the misery loves company. So we begin to want to pal around with other people that have equally misery so we can all cry in our sorrows together. Well, how to say no once we've said yes to something. I think back to many moons ago, my first job, I had my first apartment, and I had my first big decision to make, which was the need to recant and say no to something that I had previously said yes to. I had a coworker that had a really, really nice stereo system. And that stereo system would have been just perfect for my new first apartment. And I said, yes, yeah, sure. She wanted to buy it because she was having financial pressures. And I said, yes, I'll buy it. But once I began to look at how much that would take on a monthly basis for several months, and it would have made it very difficult for me to pay my rent and do other things that was needed. And I realized that life is about making choices, whether they're yes or no, and then owning up to any of our misspeaks. If we say yes when we really could have said no, and maybe in the long run should have said no, it's time to step up, or vice versa. If we've said yes and we should say no, no when we should say yes, to muster the courage to realize that the freedom of going back and saying no overrides and releases from guilt. And it can also prove to be how legitimate the relationship and the friendship is. That to always be very judicious in making commitments. Think it through first. Don't speak and then act. You want to think it through and then act. Which leads to, it's always need versus need. And to not be influenced by assumed obligations. That once we do say yes to something, to be the type of person that will carry it out, or be honest enough to say, I've bit off more than I can chew. And being as kind, but yet as honest in asking for understanding. The decision was the hardest part, of being open and honest that I made a decision, I misspoke, I do not have right now the funds to buy your stereo, etc., etc., etc. Decision is the hardest part. But making thought out decisions in life continues to serve me well. So no matter what you may have experienced in the past, once something is leading in the direction of more effectiveness, embrace it and go for it. So Dr. Glasser, in showing a video of his where he was doing some role playing, one of the guys that was doing the role playing he had the intentions of being really crazy. He wanted to do all kinds of crazy things because he wanted Dr. Glasser to fix it. And at the end of the role play, the person who wanted to be crazy asked Dr. Glasser, how did you keep me from being so crazy? He said, I really had a lot of things that I wanted to be paranoid and be this and be that, and be something else. And Dr. Glasser said, honesty will cut through the craziness. He said, I agreed with you. When you told me you were crazy, I didn't try to convince you that you were not. I just simply agreed with you. And anytime we can be honest with ourselves, it cuts through all the shadows. It cuts through the pretending. It cuts through any dishonesty. So here's just a couple of thoughts underneath that. We stay stuck by not choosing. And one of the things that, knowing how that our thoughts form this neural pathway, and that the more we traverse that very thick path, the more it becomes a path that's easier to traverse. So we stay stuck by not choosing. And to realize that those choices, it's just a neural pathway. And we have millions of, or there are millions of thoughts out there, and we can make them again and again and again. And that we change reality by making choices. And it's just a neural pathway. It's making a choice this time. Maybe we'll make the same choice next time, maybe not. And it's looking at the fact, here's the rub, that choosing is not automatic, it's deliberate. We may have a thought, but just having a thought is not actually making the choice until we act on it, until we actually make the choice to either, but what if it embarrasses me? I said yes, and I really can't do it. I can't beat that. Well, then we have to own up to that. We have to take responsibility for who we are and for the decisions we made at the time and the decisions that we keep on making. Going from should to could. Well, I should have to what I could have. This is what I could have done. And so it is empowering, because after all, it's just a neural pathway. But the more we use it, the more it becomes effective. Take baby steps, consciously, on purpose, deliberate, not just random. We need to simplify the chaos that we create. And yeah, we are the creators. We are the architects of our life. Knowing that you cannot organize clutter. I mean, you can kind of push it all together and maybe stack it up and it looks a little neater, but it's not neat because it's still clutter. And if it's not being useful, it's clutter and you can't organize it. So we need to simplify the chaos that we do create. Because life has two consistencies. And the consistency is that we're always living in the now that always is. It always is. 10 minutes ago is already the past. The now is always now, and it always is. And that's the only time that we can make error, or the only time that we can begin to correct error, is in those two consistencies. But then life does give us a little more consistencies, because we are constantly have the ability to make shifts, to make little shifts, to make different thoughts, to see things differently. And so light dispels darkness only every time. Whether it is pitch, we just say a little firefly, oh, that gives me hope that maybe there's a way out of this darkness. So what might we be afraid of? And sometimes it may sound silly, but we can fear success as much as we can fear failure. Sometimes we can fear mistakes as much as we can fear misunderstandings. We can fear being right as much as we can fear being wrong. But it's looking at that and realizing in the midst of that fear, what is it that we need? Are we needing someone to give us permission? Well, guess what? We are the architect of our own life. We have to give ourselves permission. We have to find our own resources. In one of our after broadcast chats one day, we were talking about the fact that we as individuals, we use whatever is at easiest disposal to us. And that includes the homes that we build. How that there are, in some countries, because anyway, it depends on what is available to us, what our resources are, how much energy we have. And the more we keep our energy flowing by making changes, by keeping the energy up, the more the ideas come, the more courage we have. And acceptance. Acceptance is accepting everything as it is, good, bad, and indifferent. Accepting it as it is. And that very acceptance brings some kind of a conclusion that gives us a foundation to begin to build or rebuild upon. So those are just the thoughts. And thank you for being here. And maybe it spurred some additional thoughts in you to realize to go ahead and try down that way and check it out. Maybe beautiful scenery down there. So it's good to have you here. And I'm going to stop the recording, and good mental health and many blessings to all.